All right, let's get cooking. Welcome to the latest edition of Chin Check Sports Radio. I'm your host, JD. I want to thank you all for taking the time out to join us. And as always, we welcome any suggestions, feedback, comments, and criticisms, which improves the quality of our program, which ultimately improves your listening experience. Before we get started, I want to tell all of you thank you for your tremendous support. People are slowly but surely finding out about who we are and what we do. They enjoy and respect the passion with which we speak. But as we always say here at Chin Check Sports Radio, we do this because we love it, as we are simply sharing our passion with you all as we continue to build our listening army to take over the world. This list continues of the Chin Check Sports Radio top 10 most controversial boxing decisions of all time, based on the fights that we grew up watching. Folks, and I tell you, this brings back a lot of nostalgia, a lot of going back and reviewing the fights to see why did these fights pop up, why were these fights so memorable, and we're definitely leaving nothing to disappoint. Next up on the list, November 22nd, 1997, billed as a legend continues, heavyweight champion of the world, George Foreman, against one Shannon Briggs in Atlantic City, New Jersey, at the Trump Taj Mahal. Now, folks, it's not about Trump. It's not about politics. This is about, we mentioned this before, how Atlantic City was a hotbed of East Coast boxing. Now you have it at the Barclays Center, but Atlantic City was the place where major boxing fights took place. It almost seems like it was a lifetime ago, but we were old enough to have been there, to understood it. We have been at Atlantic City Boardwalk, definitely watching the fight, so it definitely brings back a lot of memories. Going into this fight, so let's go over the record of both men and the background going into this fight. We'll start off with Shannon Briggs. Shannon Briggs, his notable fights at the time, he fought Darryl Wilson when he was 25-0 and was TKO'd in the third round by a really unheralded fighter. So after that, his next major fight was against one George Foreman. George Foreman, I think the record speaks for itself. Gold medalist at the 1968 Olympics. Former heavyweight champion of the world. Fought guys of the 70s. The George Chuvalos, Chuck Wepner, the inspiration for Rocky, Jack O'Halloran, who, if you know that name sounds familiar, he played in Superman 2. Remember how they had General Zod and the female and the guy who couldn't talk? He was a guy who couldn't talk. So just a little funny history there. So what really put George Foreman on the map was as a heavy underdog, January 22nd, 1973, a TKO in the second round against Joe Frazier. And folks, till this day, that fight is seen as one of the most destructive heavyweight championship fights of all time. And this is Joe Frazier, who already had beaten Muhammad Ali. This is Joe Frazier, who was a heavyweight champion of the world, and George Foreman destroys him in 2 rounds. It was ironic. George Foreman always says the reason why he kept knocking Joe Frazier down so much because he was afraid that Joe Frazier would get up and knock him down. March 26, 1974, and Joe Frazier rests in power. March 26, 1974, a TKO, again the second round, against the late Ken Norton Sr. Again, a destructive fight. His first loss, October 30th, 1974, to the late Muhammad Ali in the Rumble in the Jungle, a KO in the 8th round. So rest in power to all those men. January 1976, a KO in the 5th round over Ron Lyle in a very exciting and sloppy fight, but definitely a very exciting fight. June 1976, a TKO in the 5th round in a rematch against the late great Joe Frazier. In March of 1977, a unanimous decision loss against one Jimmy Young that sent George Foreman into a 10-year retirement. We're going to pick up his 10-year retirement March the 19th, 1988, a TKO in the 7th round against former cruiserweight champion of the world, Dwight Muhammad Cowie. And again, he fights his way up, and earns a championship fight against then undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, Evander the Real Deal Holyfield, on April 19, 1991. We actually watched that fight, And we had our sentimental thing for George, but we were big Holyfield fans who definitely was rooting for Holyfield, and Holyfield in a clear, unanimous decision victory. In 1993, June 7th, a loss against the late Tommy Morrison, the Tommy Morrison who played Tommy the Machine Gun in Rocky V, and definitely lost that fight. Now, we mentioned this next fight before. November the 5th, 1994, KO victory in the 10th round against Michael Moore. Against, again, the lineal heavyweight champion of the world, and we're going to break down why. And KO Michael Moore, and that was our Chin Check Sports Radio top 10 upsets of all time. Go check out that list. So after being battered for 9 rounds, Foreman lands the beautiful right hand on the chin that just knocks out Michael Moore, wrestles the WBA and the IBF and the lineal heavyweight championship, and pretty much a star was born. So the fact that we're still using George Foreman grills is from that fight. In April of 1995, a very questionable decision victory over one Axel Schultz. Folks, we might talk about that fight at some part in this list. Not saying when, but at some part this fight might be discussed again. Which brings us to this fight. Now, even going back further, we mentioned how Foreman, when he beat Michael Moore, won the WBA and the IBF championship. Lennox Lewis was a WBC championship, and of course that belt had been swinging back and forth because Wonder Riddick Bowe refused to fight Lennox Lewis, and the belt was in the trash. And then Lewis won the title. Then he knocked out this person and lost the fight. So either way, not to get too much into the boxing history. So George Foreman had 2 of the heavyweight titles, and again was the lineal heavyweight champ of the world. We'll explain to you what the lineal is. You trace a line. You trace lineage. The guy who beat the guy who beat the guy. So Mike Tyson was the lineal heavyweight champion of the world. He was the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. He had all the titles. He had all the belts. So there was no question that Mike Tyson was the best fighter of that time, of his particular era, on that year going into 1990. When Buster Douglas knocks out Mike Tyson, he became the lineal champion of the world. So not only did he win the title belts, the WBC, the WBA, and the IBF, he was the lineal champion of the world because he just beat the man. When Evander Holyfield knocked out one Buster Douglas, that made Evander Holyfield the lineal champion of the world. When Riddick Bowe beat Evander Holyfield, then Riddick Bowe became the lineal heavyweight champion of the world. When Evander Holyfield beat Riddick Bowe again, well, let me phrase that. When he beat him in a rematch, then Evander Holyfield once again became the lineal heavyweight champion of the world because the man who beat the man who beat the man. Then when Michael Moore beat Evander Holyfield, he became the lineal heavyweight champion of the world. And when George Foreman knocked out Michael Moore, so George Foreman, despite belts, was a lineal heavyweight champion of the world. You can trace that line or lineage to the man who beat the man who beat the man who beat the man. So that's how it works in the sport of boxing. So Foreman already surrendered the WBA title. The match that we mentioned against one Axel Schultz, an immediate rematch was ordered. That Foreman decided against the rematch, and he forfeited the IBF title. So he didn't have any belts on the line per se, but again, the lineal heavyweight championship of the world, that what was on the line. So let's jump right into the action. In round 1, we felt that Shannon Briggs won the first round. So Shannon Briggs, we thought he came out jabbing beautifully, boxing, because again, the George Foreman who KO'd the Ken Nortons, who KO'd the Joe Frazier's, was a younger, more athletic George Foreman. The George Foreman that made a comeback, had put on some weight, he was slower, plodding, but he still had the punching power, and as you always hear in boxing, the punching power is the last thing to go. The skills might erode, the reflexes might deteriorate, those things happen as we get older, but the power still remains. So George Foreman plodding and just winging him hard punches. So Briggs, using his youth, using his advantage in speed and footwork, we thought he utilized it a whole lot in round 1 to actually take round 1. Round 2, we scored round 2 evenly because we felt that Briggs did his damage, and when he stopped utilizing angles and footwork and lateral movement, he became a very stationary target, and Foreman began to land his shots. So you have parts of round 2 where Briggs was basically boxing, stopped boxing, stood directly in front of George, and George was able to pick his spots. But nothing that we saw that one guy overwhelmed the other guy or you had a guy who convincingly won the round. Round 3. We gave round 3 to George Foreman just based on the clean right hands. I mean, he was landing right hand after right hand over the top of Briggs' lazy jab, especially when Briggs stopped fighting in the center of the ring. Briggs' corner kept telling him, your best option to win the fight is to stand right in the middle of the ring. Basically, use your youth, your quickness, your jab to outbox Foreman. You had Big George's advantages was when he was against the ropes and the pace was slow. For some reason, Shannon Briggs starts backing up against the ropes willingly, and he was getting caught with clean right hands. So we definitely gave a third round to George Foreman. Round 4, George Foreman again began landing some good solid jabs and some good right hands to dictate the pace of the action. Round 5. So we gave rounds 3, round 4, and now round 5 to George Foreman. Why? Because again, George Foreman slowed the pace down, landing those hard, thudding right hands. He was dictating the pace. He was using, again, and we mentioned the criteria, ring generalship. So again, clean, hard punching, effective aggression, and ring generalship. And George Foreman fighting the fight that he wants, and Shannon Briggs standing directly in front of Big George and backing up against the ropes that made him a very stationary target and, quite frankly, a heavy bag with feet. So we gave the 5th round to George Foreman. Shannon Briggs, listening to the advice of his corner, picked up the pace a little bit in round 6 and round 7. So we gave both rounds to Shannon Briggs just based on boxing. He boxed, he moved, he actually landed punches to Big George's body. And even Jim Lampley said it, was that he never understood why more fighters never really attacked George to his large body. Again, he wasn't the same cut, ripped up George Foreman with who had the afro in the 70s. He was a larger target, which means his body was larger. In some cases, his abdomen might have protruded over his boxing trunks. So the body was there all day, and Shannon Briggs was attacking the body, which forced George to definitely bring his hands down. Because if you go back and watch the older George Foreman, when using defense, he used the old school of the Ken Norton cross arms defense, but his body was very vulnerable. And Briggs, especially in those 6 and 7 rounds, we thought was mixing up the attack. Again, going back to boxing, jabbing, snapping George's head back, and throwing some good shots to the body and mixing the attack upstairs. Round 8. We thought that Foreman clearly won that round because he landed probably the hardest series of punches in that entire fight. And so to me, George definitely won that fight. Round 9. We definitely gave that round to George Foreman because we felt that George fought better on the inside. A lot of tremendous inside fighting, nice good body punches that we feel definitely got Briggs' attention. And also mixing up the attack again. Shannon Briggs, he stops boxing. He gives up the advantage that he has in youth and speed and, quite frankly, boxing ability and a quicker jab to stand directly in front of Foreman. And there was even talk, even by the broadcasters, about George's strength was his conditioning and his cardiovascular fitness. A weakness and a known weakness, and even known by Shannon Briggs, was due to his asthma, was not being able to have the stamina to fight for a long period of time at such a sustained and an action-packed pace. So we gave round 8 and round 9 to George Foreman. Now, round 10 was different. We started giving the round to George Foreman because we felt he landed hard body shots that stopped Briggs right in his tracks. But then Briggs, in the final 30 seconds, landed some extremely hard shots that we felt that kind of wobbled George or kind of stunned George, because even George, even in his comeback, wasn't really knocked down like that. He might have been wobbled, but he wasn't really going down like that. And we want to go back. Was he even knocked down in his comeback? But anyway, so we gave that round to Briggs based on what he did in the final 30 seconds to a minute. Now, yes, we've always stated that if a guy's winning the first 2 rounds and if the guy comes back and wins the last 30 seconds, does he automatically win the round? Well, in this case, George landed the hard shot that froze with a body punch, and that was one hard shot. Briggs landed more shots that really did more damage. So we felt that Briggs did more damage at the end of the 10th round. We gave the 11th and the 12th round, while competitive, but we gave the 11th and the 12th round to George Foreman. because we felt that Foreman, he did more. He pressed the action while Briggs is backing up. George is landing more. Again, Briggs was showing some heart, but we don't feel that it was enough to actually win the round because we felt that George was actually doing more. So we gave 7 rounds to George Foreman, 4 rounds to Shannon Briggs, and we scored 1 round even. The official judging of the fight was 114-114, a draw. 116-112, folks, that's 8 rounds to 4. 117-113. So clearly that's basically almost 9 rounds to 3-ish around there. So Shannon Briggs has beat George Foreman in a 12-round majority decision. Folks, yes, that Shannon Briggs, who goes around confronting other fighters, confronted Vladimir Klitschko, Quentin Rampage Jackson, Mike Tyson, saying, "Let's go, champ! Let's go, champ! Let's go, champ!" Ladies and gentlemen, that guy was once the lineal heavyweight champion of the world. Let that sink in. Again, I'm going to say this again. The same guy who you see on YouTube confronting Vladimir Klitschko and Mike Tyson and Quentin Rampage Jackson and just gets loud and "Let's go, champ! Let's go, champ! Let's go, champ! Let's go, champ!" He's from Brooklyn, New York. And this man, based on winning this fight, and we broke down lineage, Shannon Briggs is recognized in boxing history at one time being the lineal heavyweight champion of the world. Let that sink in. So what was the aftermath? Folks, this was George Foreman's last fight. His last ever professional fight. Again, like, the man was 48 years old. Hell, he was 45 years old in 1994 when he knocked out Michael Moore. So now, 3 years later, he is now 48 years old. So again, we're almost pushing 50. George Foreman clearly won this fight, and it definitely was his last fight. What happened with Shannon Briggs? That saved his career. He gets the fight against Lennox Lewis and is knocked out in the 5th round, and basically served as a journeyman for the rest of his career. So these are the things that we love about boxing. And again, fights are not easy to score. This fight is part of the list because it was a fight that we actually watched and we're like, George is winning. He's doing well for a 48-year-old. He's landing some hard punches. And how could the refs give him this fight? I get it. If you maybe see the fight as a draw, that's a possible maybe. But the 117-113s and 116-112s, that's pretty much 8 rounds to 4, 9 rounds to 3. It is no way watching that fight that you can give Shannon Briggs 8 rounds or 9 rounds. Even the 6 rounds are really a stretch if we're being honest about it. But those are the things with boxing, and this is why this fight is kind of up there. Again, it wasn't really a big-time fight, but definitely at that time, it was pretty much a middle-of-the-road fight. Again, this is George Foreman, the lineal heavyweight champion of the world, still a big name, fighting up-and-coming fighter. So we definitely have fun with this list, and we're definitely going to have more fights coming. Definitely leave your comments in the comment section. And until the next time, it's Chin Check Sports Radio. Signing out.